presentations. And well, the first presentation is by matí.
Correct?
Yeah. Okay. The head of Department of Theory and History of Fine Arts at University of Ostrava, and where he's teaching mainly music analysis and 20th century music history. And he's the author of a seminal book about Alhaz, and I published in 2020 by Routledge, and several other articles with related issues. And today, this presentation is about specific aspects of feminine studies and challenges with it, about the case of Alhaz, so important and necessary. So perhaps it's done reading along a very stimulating analysis and perhaps.
Right. Thank you very much. Let me take over from there, and you see the title of my paper is Reading Meaning in and Out of Music from Theresienstadt. So first, what is Theresienstadt? It's the German name for Terezín, which is a town in the Czech Republic, which between 1941 and 45 became a place in where Jewish people from Nazi-occupied territories were imprisoned before being deported to extermination camps, such as Auschwitz. Despite the atrocious living conditions, musical activities flourished in the camp, and the inmates formed chamber ensembles and choirs and orchestras, and people like Pavel Haas or Viktor Ullmann, Hans Grasa or Gideon Klein, they composed new music performed in the ghetto. And you might wonder, what do the Nazis think about that? Well, they not only tolerated, but they supported that. And why would they do that? Because they used it for their propaganda campaign, because they wanted to show that they didn't kill the Jews, they gave the city to the Jews to enjoy. So this charade culminated in June 1944, when there was a Red Cross inspection to Theresienstadt. And the Nazis scheduled musical performances on that day. And they used that to shoot a propaganda video called Der Führer schenkt den Juden eine Stadt. The Führer gives a city to the Jews. And after this, the Nazis had no more use for all those people, so they sent them to Auschwitz to get gassed. So that's the context of my paper, and my question is, how on earth are we supposed to interpret music composed under such extreme circumstances? The trouble is that we have expectations that this music must somehow express the suffering, the hope of those people, perhaps the resistance of those people. And if we don't find that, we must think, well, maybe the music is ironic, maybe it's subversive, maybe they felt censored, so they used codes to code their messages of suffering. The problem with codes is that they imply existence of one definitive true meaning, which is expected to be revealed once you break the code. The next problem is that if you are too certain about what the true meaning should be, you are going to invent the code to find exactly what you are looking for. And you know, there's something called biographical fallacy, which is the idea that music is all about the author. And whenever there's emotion in the music, it belongs to the author. Whenever there's a story in the music, the author is the protagonist. And the result is that you use biographical clues as key to musical interpretation, which is problematic. How do you go about contextualizing music? How do you build context? Well, you can use a historiographical approach or an intertextual approach. So as a historiograph, you are going to look at the biography, the events in the ghetto, provable links and contacts with other artists. When talking about the works, you're going to be interested about chronology, circumstances for performance, the manuscript. That's all legitimate, that's fine. But you shouldn't forget about the intertextual approach, which looks for connections between this work and different styles and genres and perhaps other works of literature. And essentially, you need to make connections across time and space, not just Theresienstadt. It's just not fair. The people were not born in Theresienstadt. They may have died there, but yeah. You should look for recurring themes and compositional strategies in the cultural background throughout the composer's era. They perhaps created for 30 years before they came to Theresienstadt, so that must be important. And you wonder about the title of my paper, Reading Meaning In and Out. Well, I argue that you can start reading from the text as your starting point, or from the context as your starting point. And this is what happens. When you first read the work and start with the text, you find relevant contexts for it. You construct a framework of reference. You build the context. And this is what I mean, reading out of the text. If you flip that around and you start with Theresienstadt suffering, Nazis killing Jews, you start with the context. And then you find corresponding elements in the work. And you kind of confirm your assumptions. And that's what I called reading meaning into the text. But, a caveat. When you start reading the work and you build some context, you notice stuff in the context and you read it back into the work. And that's normal. It's a two-way process of reading in and out. So that's unavoidable. I guess it's a matter of balance, really. And funnily enough, the context is of course a conceptual construct, but if you read that way too, the text itself becomes a conceptual construct. So it becomes really different, really difficult. Anyway, I want to present a question to you, which was asked by Michael Beckerman. What kind of a historical document is a musical score? And he was talking about a piece from Theresienstadt by Gideon Klein. And I've struggled with this question. And my short answer is none. Music score is not a historical document, end of story. But you want to hear the long answer. Okay, so here it is. It depends whether by musical score you mean the physical artifact or you mean a musical work. So if it's a physical artifact, you can focus on properties of paper, properties of handwriting. You can look at non-musical text on the margins, which may inform you when the piece was composed, what was the weather on that day. And you can take this information at face value. You can assume direct reference to the world out there. So what you get to know is that it was written on a worn piece of paper with a shaking hand on 15 March, which was a particularly cold day. And these are more or less facts. If you understand musical score as a musical work, well then you have to understand it as a complex musical sign constructed with awareness of principles of syntax and conventions of style and genre. And you can't assume a direct reference to the world out there. You have to interpret that with awareness of syntax, style, genres, and so on. So what you get is that there's a military march in C major with some striking dissonances, followed by a Tempesta-style transition leading to blah, blah, blah. Does that tell you directly something about the world out there? Well, that actually remains to be interpreted further. So we have to adjust our reading to what we are dealing with. And I want to invert this question. What kind of a historical document is a musical score? I ask, is musical score required to be a historical document? The question is what we want. Imagine this spectrum. On the left end, you have works with very strong political and social relevance. And at the right end, you have works that are aesthetically autonomous. Okay. Both extremes are probably problematic. Most of art is somehow distributed across the spectrum. And if you are at the right end of the spectrum, you claim that this is a work with total aesthetic autonomy, it's not fashionable, at least these days. You want to, interpret social relevance, but it's tolerable. But once you deal with Holocaust art, and you claim aesthetic autonomy, or anything close to it, it's a red flag. I mean, you can claim that the Beethoven quartet has nothing to do with Beethoven's life. It's not fashionable, but you would be respected if you claimed as an academic. If I say the same about a piece composed in Theresienstadt, people would kick me out. It's just not acceptable. And I want to present that, remind you of that the kind of pressure that we are under. So, what is Holocaust art? Is it Holocaust memorial, or is it a work of art? If it's Holocaust memorial, it has memorial function rather than aesthetic function. It has ethical value rather than aesthetic value. And ultimately, it's untouchable. Whereas the work of art needs to be open to interpretation. Think about that. What kind of pressure it puts on people who try to interpret hermeneutically this music. So, the case of Pavel Haas. There's an anecdote I want to start with, related by Joža Karas, who said that Haas came to Theresienstadt with undermined health. The miserable conditions further affected his severe depressions, resulting in total indifference to the very busy musical life of the ghetto. One day, to wake him up from his lethargy, Gideon Klein put in front of him several sheets of paper on which he himself drew the musical staff and urged Haas to stop wasting time. And indeed, Haas composed several pieces during his stay in Theresienstadt, although only 3 of them have been preserved. So we learned that Haas was in a really bad shape when he came to the ghetto. And we are told that if it weren't for Gideon Klein, who encouraged him to compose, he wouldn't have composed anything. Totally believable, right? There's no reason to doubt that at all. The question is, how do people use that information to portray Pavel Haas? So, oh no, I want to go this way. Right. Just a quick review. Haas composed music before he came to Theresienstadt, during the war, but before his imprisonment. So, in the early years of the war, he wrote 2 pieces with strong patriotic symbolism. I will going to be showing you the Wenceslas Chorale, which is a national monument. While in Theresienstadt, he composed 3 other pieces. One of them was called Al Sfot, which is a Hebrew chorus with the text, "Do not lament and do not cry, pave the path for a bright day." So struggle against, whatever the hardship is. Then he composed a study for strings, which is a neoclassical instrumental work, which on the surface has nothing to do at all with, his plight. And the 4 songs on Chinese poetry, which starts with the line, "My home is there, far away there." So that's the basic info. Here comes Robin Freeman, an intelligent person who, however, made some really provocative assumptions about Haas. So he referenced these lines from the folk songs to argue that, Klein was the active and supportive person, whereas Haas just wanted to go home. And there's some kind of derogatory undertone in what he's saying. And he goes further. He says not only Klein encouraged Haas to write, he says Klein influenced what Haas wrote. So he says that the study for string is inconceivable in style without Klein. And I don't even engage with that argument, because he's just tendentious. He took this story and he drew these conclusions out of it. And he conveniently doesn't mention at all this choir, which is all about supporting people not to cry and to try to move on, or to carry on despite the hardship. That didn't fit his argument, so we left it out. And then comes Lubomir Peduci, who was the biographer of Haas, and he struggled against this myth of Haas as a broken composer. And he said, look, there's this choir which is supposed to lift up his fellow prisoners. Haas clearly didn't try to lift up the community. And he emphasized the patriotic symbolism of Haas's pre-Theresienstadt works. But he conveniently did not mention the 4 songs on Chinese poetry because, you know, they were about wanting to go home, ultimately. That's fair. So you have all these biases, and spiritual resistance seems to be the theme. We expect artistic works to express spiritual resistance. But it almost seems that that's the only legitimate message of Holocaust art. Freeman says that Haas is bad for writing about wanting to go home. And Peduzzi says that actually Klein is bad because he wrote some madrigals on some really morbid subjective texts. So there's, I don't know, Freeman had an agenda because he wanted to promote Klein as the kind of spiritus agens of the ghetto. But Peduzzi perhaps had an agenda, and I feel that his rhetoric kind of echoes the rhetoric of socialist realism, which means that art must portray the revolutionary struggle and bright future. And again, you are imposing expectations, imposing ideologies on works of art, which is problematic. So how did Peduzzi interpret the 4 songs on Chinese poetry? He claimed that they contain references to St. Wenceslav chorale and that they have an optimistic ending. And I believe that he claimed that in order to link these pieces to the patriotic pieces Haas composed before being imprisoned. Right. So this is the Wenceslav chorale. I'm going to sing to you just the very opening of that. Svati Václave, vodočeské země kněže náš. Okay, so this is quoted in his works from early years of the war. This is the symphony composed 1940 to 41, and this Wenceslav theme is very clearly stylized as a military march. This is an extremely bold statement. This is battle music, right? Let's fight the Germans. Exactly. But this is how it appears in Suite for oboe and piano. And this is the more meditative, perhaps prayer-like stylization of the same piece. Wenceslas was both a saint and a warrior. So we have the warrior in the symphony, we have the saint in here. And this is the beginning of the 4 songs. And Peduzzi claims that this 4-note ostinato is like the Václave motif. I'm going to play it to you and just let you make up your mind. This is really subdued, at the very least. And I argue it's really not helpful to think of it as a Wenceslav's quotation. I think it's really a symbol of home, because when the voice enters, it starts with Domov so it's my home is there. The thought of home is, I think, what's this 4-note ostinato, which really goes through the entire cycle, like an idée fixe of home, perhaps. It's circular. It's repetitive, it's monotonous. It's like a melancholic, helpless turning over of the thought of your lost home. And I believe this is actually about futility of agency. I'm going to play you this section from the same song, which shows how the subject struggles, longs for home, which is unattainable. And look at the progressive diminution of rhythmic values. The struggle is there, but he doesn't really move anywhere.
Obispo
For me, this is about futility of agency. However hard you try, you're not going to move from your place. It's a vicious circle. So, I don't know, I'm not convinced about the Wenceslas thing. And just one example how he uses this motif, for example, to illustrate the cry of wild geese that appears in the poem that he's setting, and he's superimposing different layers of this ostinato over each other to produce this beautiful effect. So it becomes a kind of an optic illusion, perhaps the fata morgana of dreaming about your home and not being able to actually go there, I don't know. And this is the climax of the song, expressing the ineffable. The text is, hands of mine, my hands, how empty you are to send it all, which is a strange sentence. Your hands are empty to say something. But it's ultimately about the unspeakable, the ineffable. And this is a significant absence. This is a moment of the ineffable, unable to actually speak about the suffering. And, you know, we may experience the same thing, well, not the same thing, a similar thing, as interpreters. How do you even speak about this music? Maybe you should just shut up and not try. And I won't bother you with the fact that this motif is a quotation from an opera by Haas, and there are some uncanny themes that are a really interesting avenue to explore this. And there's a quotation from the person who survived Theresienstadt, who commented on related issues, but I'm skipping that in the interest of time. Peduzzi also made a second claim that the cycle has an optimistic ending. And I doubted that. Because the structure is as follows. You have the first melancholic song. You have improbably joyful song as the second one. You plunge back into melancholy in the first one with a return of the four-note ostinato. And then there's a fourth song which somehow transforms from melancholy to joy. And it ends with this strangely happy la 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 singing. Interpret this as a trajectory leading from darkness to light, a linear movement. But really this material in this song comes from this song, and this material returns back in this. It's cyclic. It's a cycle. Is it a vicious circle? Or is there a sort of yin-yang relationship between these polar opposites? I actually think this might be a better interpretation. Is there a victory or resolution? I don't think so. But maybe what it proposes is a philosophical view which helps to shift focus from the vicious circle of frustrated individual agency to a sort of life-affirming cosmic cycle of perpetual transformation. In other words, Haas's song from Theresienstadt interrogated the most fundamental questions of human life and death. And they portray the despair of death in the middle of life, and the joy of life amidst death. But I wouldn't speak of a victory. So, to get back, is Holocaust art a memorial, or is it a work of art? I'm troubled by the idea of this art being untouchable and not open to interpretation. And I want to argue that Theresienstadt composers have rights. They have rights to be honored and commemorated as victims of Nazism. And we do that by performing acts of commemoration. But they also have the right to be honored and appreciated as artists. And how do we do that? By engaging with their works and appreciating them as aesthetic objects that demand to be interpreted on their own terms. And maybe works have rights to be regarded as works of art, as aesthetic objects rather than memorial objects. To fully realize their potential, to be interpreted freely from a variety of perspectives. And to be defended from simplistic, biased, misleading, or frankly stupid interpretations. And that's my case. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for this amazing presentation. That's a very common words in this case, but I'm really impressed by the clarity and the so really insightful, so stimulating, so applicable to so many situations. So really, thank you very much indeed for the presentation. And now I ask if there are some commentaries or some questions to Martin? You so impressed? Yeah, pleasure, perhaps.
Thank you very much indeed for this brilliant presentation. And I want to thank you for releasing the tension of reading in a certain context, and also from linear reading. And I have a comment, and I'm just wondering how you respond to that, about this ending of Sleepless Night, of the fourth song that you showed us, and that you showed us that it's not a victory according to you, but rather yin-yang, this final joy. I sense when I heard it that you can also feel it like an irony a bit, maybe not a real joy. And actually what came to my mind was at the ending of Mahler's Fifth Symphony, which a little bit like it reverses the paradigm per aspera ad astra. Most claim that it is so there, but you can also read the ending not heavy, maybe not ironic, but very light thing. So maybe some kind of, I don't know, intertextual.
You are on the right track, and I've actually written in my book a lot about irony and the grotesque in Haas's music, and I read about Mahler precisely for that reason. And that was my first thought, and I wanted to find clues in this music to support the ironic reading of that. And you could argue that, and I wouldn't protest against that, but I think that when Haas was being ironic, there were very clear clues in his music in terms of, I don't know, strange rhythms or some dissonances to signify that it's a tongue-in-cheek statement. So I wanted to find that, and then I ended up thinking this. But it's a valid point, and I would certainly take it into account.
Thank you.
I was thinking the same thing about the end of Mahler Fifth, which Adorno doesn't believe. If you remember, he says nobody believes this. This is just there's no verisimilitude in this. It's quite a thing. But I wonder, on the other hand, if we didn't know the circumstances of the piece, you know, where it was written and when, maybe we would believe this optimistic ending. I don't know.
That's exactly, yes, thank you for saying that. It's exactly the problem. Once you know, you cannot unknow. Also, there's a clue in the text that this is an awakening of a new day, which is in the poem. And bear in mind, this is Chinese poetry, so maybe the yin-yang thing isn't quite as arbitrary as it might seem. And there's, it's in the text, it has to do with cycles of day and night. So the first and third talk about the moon a lot, so they signify this is night music. And this is clearly the dawn of a new day, which again you can interpret as a cyclic motion.
Thank you. Just a personal commentary. I'm always very interested in performative implications or issues. In this case, these diverse possible hermeneutical readings could also enable different performative practices. Actually, these from darkness to light, or even this ironic reading of the ending as a possible distorted approach to something that seems joy, but it's also perhaps something strange and grotesque. It's very easy through the performance with very teeny intervention could change everything. So
exactly, you can sing it ironically, you can play it kind of ironically. You know, there's something cheeky about this bum 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 pattern. So okay, there is a clue of an irony, and you know, yes, there is. I decided for this reading. Maybe yours better after all. I don't know.
So thank you very much indeed.
It's not in English but in Catalan, right?
So we have Bernat Sanchez Farrés, pianist from Barcelona, and he studied here in the ESMUC and in Liceu with Emily Brogalla, among others, and also in Mozarteum, Salzburg, and in the master degree on biomechanical issues, piano performance at ESMUC, and now is doctoral students at Aveiro University. And the presentation is about one of his the title of his doctoral project, Open Scores, Preludes, Interludes, Fermatas, and Ornamentations, Keys to Reconfigure the Piano Duet. And so this is one of the first results of his research that I know quite well. And focusing this creative perspective about the use of this intervention in piano duet, and in particular with the case of Rachmaninoff's Suite Tableau 5, in which this intervention with this impressionistic meaning and so interested in the interconnection between these. So, Bernat.
Se'm sent bé? Sí? Molt bé, doncs... Bon dia a tothom. El meu nom és, com he dit, Luca Bernat Sánchez Farrés i avui, abans de res, vull agrair sobretot a en Joan Grimal per l'organització d'aquestes jornades tan interessants perquè diguem-ne que permeten donar visibilitat a molts projectes diferents i és d'agrair. Bé, doncs jo el que volia fer avui sobretot era presentar-vos el que ha estat un capítol nou a la meva vida, que és començar un projecte de doctorat l'any passat, no? I bé, és un projecte d'investigació artística que ho faig a la Universitat d'Aveiro amb l'ajuda del Luca i bé, és un projecte de doctorat una mica especial, diguem-ne, perquè és mig compartit, no? Amb la meva parella, amb la Júlia, que està aquí i que després també es posarà. I bé, tracta sobretot d'una de les coses que més fem ara mateix a nivell professional, que és tocar a duo, no? De piano, 4 mans i 2 pianos. I bé, com que el temps és limitat avui, jo sobretot el que volia fer era presentar una mica quin és el punt de partida de la investigació, quines accions artístiques prenc, quins resultats i expectatives espero assolir com a punts inicials i com a última part faré una mica de mostra del que és, per exemple, com ha comentat el Luca amb el Rachmaninoff, no? Una primera aproximació pràctica, diguem-ho així, a el que la meva tesi intenta aportar. Bé, doncs, com a punt de partida d'aquesta investigació, sobretot fa molt referència a el que va ser la meva trajectòria acadèmica, entre ESMUC i Liceu, després Mozarteum, l'ESMAR, i clar, diguem-ne que tot això, jo soc format com a intèrpret pianista de música clàssica i sempre vaig tenir aquesta sensació que com a músic intèrpret no podia participar a la confecció del text que estava tocant, o sigui, simplement estava interpretant, fantàstic, em sembla molt bé, però una part de mi també sempre ha tingut aquesta sensació de que li faltava alguna cosa, poder aportar part meva. Llavors, clar, aquesta inquietud o tensió, diguem-ho així, clar, m'ha volgut empènyer a fer alguna cosa amb això, o sigui, a respondre a aquesta necessitat, diguem-ho així. Però clar, en el seu moment amb l'entorn formatiu, diguem-ne que no vaig poder-ho fer. Sobretot a la Mozarteum, amb un caràcter encara més conservador, allà pràcticament és, dintre del marc de la institució és complicat, per no dir impossible. Bé, llavors, jo he volgut anomenar aquestes dues lectures que per mi van ser bastant importants, que les vam fer l'any passat amb el Luca i les vam comentar i realment l'esbós de Busoni i la poètica musical de Stravinsky a mi m'ha donat un punt de partida per començar el que és la meva investigació, un punt de vista històric que com a dues visions oposades em permeten dir vale, jo clarament abogo més per una que per l'altra, però em serveix per, diguem-ne, armar un discurs respecte al que estic fent, perquè, diguem-ne que, clar, durant concursos, formació acadèmica, la fidelitat a l'obra moltes vegades s'ha tractat com una fidelitat molt marcada al que realment està escrit i només està escrit, i això sempre ha estat un problema per mi. Clar, jo sempre he volgut aportar, no sé si el personal, però sí alguna cosa meva respecte al que estic fent a l'hora d'interpretar i no només seguir uns ideals estètics que no van amb mi del 100%. És per això que aquesta cita de Levin també l'he trobat molt interessant, perquè com a conservatoris es busca músics amb tècnica molt solvent i que puguin realment estar-se amb uns paràmetres molt clars, no? Però a la vegada la part més imaginativa o pròpia de cadascú doncs, està més apartada, no? Per això l'he volgut compartir. Llavors, clar, amb tota aquesta situació, diguem-ho així, jo dic, vale, doncs ja que tinc aquesta inquietud i ja que estic fent aquest projecte amb la Júlia i tenia moltes ganes de veure experimentar com es podria fer això a música de cambra, no? Perquè piano sol representa que això ja s'ha fet bastant, no? Hi ha exemples, no? I en piano dur i en música de cambra doncs, vaig tenir la sensació que és una cosa que es podia provar i que sobretot la trobava necessària per la meva pràctica, perquè si no em costava molt creure-hi fer molts més anys el mateix que portava fent, no? Llavors el que em vaig plantejar és dir, vale, a veure, anem a provar a veure què passaria si la meva tesi pretén explorar en el repertori a duo doncs, el potencial de fer preludis i interludis que reconfigurin l'estructura, no? I l'estil de l'obra també, evidentment. Què passaria si amb les ornamentacions també poguéssim jugar? I què passaria també si féssim cadències, com no? Hi ha moltes cadències escrites, però què passaria si poguéssim fer cadències en certes peces que no tindrien per què ser, no? Històricament, en peces que històricament potser no s'ha fet, no? I clar, en aquest context de la música de cambra, especialment aquí a dos pianos i a quatre mans, surten moltes preguntes diferents, perquè quan et poses a realitzar certes coses doncs et trobes que a quatre mans tens unes limitacions molt clares, físiques, no? A dos pianos no tant, perquè tens més aquesta sensació de diàleg per igual en tots els registres que pot fer servir cadascú, però són aspectes que són interessants tractar-los en diferents compositors, en diferents gèneres, estils i estètiques, no? Llavors, clar, diguem-ne que aquesta tesi doncs, replanteja una mica aquesta dicotomia interpretació-composició, tot i que jo no soc compositor, no m'hi considero, jo sempre ho estic fent des de la vessant com a intèrpret, però bueno, si més no estic incidint en aquest aspecte, no? Llavors, clar, diguem-ne que quan entres en aquest context de canviar certes coses del text, doncs et trobes en situacions que dius, bueno, ja que estem fent aquesta intervenció, doncs anem a provar que realment tingui una afectació a l'escolta de tota la peça sencera i que no sigui només algo que sona entre les peces del compositor, sinó que englobi tot sencer i que modifiqui l'escolta de tota la peça sencera, no? És per això que en part volia aportar una desclassificació de certs repertoris, no? De certs compositors que els tenim escoltats d'una certa manera, buscant interconnexions entre peces i també intoxicacions entre elles, és a dir, barrejant estètiques que potser des d'una perspectiva més canònica en principi no s'ha fet gaire, no? Però que hi ha pistes, jo considero que hi ha pistes, o almenys els veig jo, que et permeten jugar en aquest sentit, no? I provar coses noves. Clar, el fet que ens posem a treballar en aquests paràmetres, al final intento sobretot incidir en el que és l'obra sencera, no? I tot i que potser l'exemple que farem avui o que escoltarem avui no incideixo en el text de Rachmaninoff i només entremig, en altres exemples que per una qüestió de temps avui no us puc ensenyar, sí que incideixo més en el text del compositor i també entremig de les peces. Llavors, com a perspectives, bé, el que jo voldria aconseguir al final de la tesi és tenir un portafoli de vídeos i unes partitures que reflexin el que hem fet, no? Evidentment també interpretacions, no? De fet, en els concerts que estem fent ara, fa 2 setmanes a Vila-seca, doncs, si vam tocar Rachmaninoff, passant coses diferents a les que escoltarem ara, perquè no hem tocat mai 2 vegades igual aquests interludis i estem afegint sempre coses i traient coses i diguem-ne que algun dia faré una partitura però no sé quina, si la del primer, la del mig o què exactament. Però sí, això seria el resultat més tangible, no? I l'altre resultat és que a mi m'interessaria que d'entrada per al públic i programadors aquest repertori fos més, diguéssim que interessés més en el sentit que es pogués programar més, es veiés amb més interès. També m'interessaria sobretot que en formacions de cambra o en el mateix repertori de duo altres persones puguin trobar inputs i maneres de reconfigurar els seus repertoris i que pugui aportar una certa... aportar que els plans d'estudi puguin ser més transversals, és a dir que des de la meva tesi es puguin imaginar certes coses, certes classes que es poguessin barrejar, piano complementari, piano, música de cambra, que pel fet que tinguis un examen de piano poguessis dir hauré de fer aquesta partita de Bach però jo li hauria de posar les meves intervencions, per què no? A mi m'hauria encantat que això hagués passat a grau professional i a grau superior, però no va passar i en aquell moment tampoc vaig tenir la suficient decisió per fer-ho. I bé, això també estaria bé que visibilitzar aquests problemes implícits en certs principis d'autoritat, de professor, alumne, manera d'interpretar canònica, manera que... Sobretot volia incidir en aquests aspectes. Bé, llavors, jo no sabia que avui hi haurien 2 pianos, llavors vaig preparar els vídeos pensant, no sé. Bé, això d'aquí, qui no conegui la suite de Rachmaninoff, diguem-ne que són 4 peces, i jo he fet 3 interludis, que estan intercalats entre la primera i segona, tercera i tercera i quarta. Jo el que he volgut fer d'entrada era no posar res que fos... O sigui, diguem-ne que tot el material que hi ha aquí ja surt en algun moment de la peça de Rachmaninoff, no hi ha res que no surti. Però l'he reordenat, algunes coses les he transportades perquè no estan al mateix to, però diguem-ne que tot el material que hi ha aquí fa referència a totes les peces. Llavors, aquí és una mica la llista de coses que he fet servir, tampoc la poso simplement com a... perquè es vegi una mica aquests aspectes, però si us sembla ho escoltem, a veure si se sent bé. Diguem-ne que, com heu pogut veure, aquí estan passant coses, sobretot amb la pedalització i amb els colors que estem intentant trobar, que no tenen gaire a veure amb el que normalment escoltem amb la música de Rachmaninoff. Ens movem amb un tipus d'estètica més afrancesada, potser podríem dir així, que és coetània a Rachmaninoff, però sí, podria ser, per què no? Jo aquí sento bastant Debussy, no sé, aquest acord augmentat fàcilment se'n pot anar a una escala de tons, però clar, estic fent servir el mateix motiu del principi de la barcarola, o sigui que en principi tot està lligat. Aquesta era la idea, sobretot, en aquesta primera connexió. com heu pogut veure, també han sortit, si coneixeu tots la peça bé, han sortit temes de la tercera peça també, i clar, això incideix en el que entenem, o sigui, el que incideix en el concepte que tenim de l'obra més cíclica, no tan lineal, no? Llavors permet saltar d'un lloc a l'altre, no? Diguem-ho així. Val, doncs aquí tenim el segon interludi, anem a escoltar-lo. Exemple. I el tercer, aquest, comentant només per agafar el que he dit abans, fa un parell de setmanes, crec, que vam tocar això a Vila-seca, per exemple, això ja no ho toquem així, d'entrada perquè abans de començar aquest interludi, amb tècniques exteses en el piano, jo faig 3 campanes dins del piano que estan relacionades amb les 3 campanes que venen després, just abans de començar amb totes les campanes senceres. Ho faig mutejant la corda i simula, jo crec que bastant bé, segons l'harmònic que toqui, l'efecte d'una campana. I en aquest cas les faig les 3 bastant fluixetes perquè tot aquest primer interludi sembli que s'acosta a l'oient. Aquí vindrien les 3 campanes, però aquí no hi és. Bé, i això mostra una mica el que es pot fer, només reordenant una mica el que el compositor ha escrit durant aquestes peces. D'entrada, nosaltres ens ho passem molt millor fent aquestes... O sigui, no us podeu imaginar jo quan toco aquesta peça d'aquesta manera el millor que m'ho passo. O sigui, jo personalment no té punt de comparació. Potser estem parlant de 3 minuts de música, 4, jo què sé. Bueno, o sigui, la peça sencera en dura 27, no? Però diguem aquests 4 minuts que he afegit jo, a mi em dóna la sensació que em sento molt més involucrat amb el que estic fent i jo crec, per mi, que és el més important com a intèrpret. Moltes gràcies.
Gràcies. Quina pena tenir els 2 pianos, podríeu haver tocat, perquè està aquí els 2 pianistes, les 2 pianistes. Bueno, i realment, jo que això ho he pogut escoltar en viu, és molt impressionant, també, de part de qui que no sap si és perquè canvia la perspectiva també de qui està tocant, que està tocant amb un altre esperit, o perquè realment la percepció de l'obra canvia. Després, òbviament, com sempre, està la qüestió de com... O sigui, hi ha tanta referència a l'obra que clarament depèn molt si la coneixem, si no la coneixem, però també si no la coneixem és una percepció molt interessant perquè apareixen, no? Com l'ús que fins i tot les obertures al segle XVIII a l'òpera servien més perquè després ens unissin als temes de les àrees, més encara que per una qüestió extremadament formal. Tenim una qüestió molt de percepció després, no? I això es pot donar també en una peça instrumental avui dia. En fi. Realment maco i sí, és una experiència molt fascinant. I fer-ho, això pensem als interludis a l'època de Mozart i tot bé, no? Però ja això no es fa tant, però ja encara, però fer-ho amb Rachmaninoff sona com molt una mica, quan en realitat sabem, no? Tenim tota la fonografia que ja els utilitzava habitualment, però em sembla que modificar textos en aquesta època ja estem molt lluny, no? En fi, bueno, no sé si hi ha algun comentari, alguna observació, amb molt de gust, Emili.
Bé, jo també sóc pianista i no he investigat, com en Bernat i la Júlia, aquest tema de les interludis, però sí que entenc la situació psicològica, que és el fet de pujar en un escenari i tocar obres que són consagrades, no? Això fa que crea dintre nostre, a més està tot molt gravat, molt tocat, ens crea com un jutge intern que molt sovint ens boicoteja, i som nosaltres que ho fem, però en fi, en totes les circumstàncies que ens envolten, no? Jo fa poc vaig fer una realització, una versió del Fandango del Pare Soler a un piano, el vaig transportar a 2 pianos perquè també tinc un duo de pianos, i la veritat és que, a part que m'ho vaig passar bé fent-ho, com dius tu, Bernat, a l'hora de tocar és molt diferent, perquè ja l'obra te l'has feta teva i has trencat una mica aquesta barrera de gel que ens creen en aquests conservatoris, en aquestes escoles, ens creen una mena de coraça, no? Que sembla que no pots fugir ni un mil·límetre del que s'espera de tu. Això és autoritarisme claríssim, i això fa que molta gent cau pel camí o es transforma en robots, no? I en aquest sentit, quan t'empoderes d'una obra fent el que sigui, no? Jo, per exemple, amb això d'Ars Manu he pensat, venia al cap què es podria fer, per exemple, d'associar aquesta obra amb la Rapsòdia espanyola de Ravel, perquè allà hi ha la nuit, no? Preludi de la nuit, no? I al principi ho feia, al primer interludi hi havia com campanetes que semblaven la campana del preludi de la nuit, no? Vull dir que es poden fer moltes coses, hi ha molta llibertat a recórrer i penso que amb això ens hem de treure una mica aquest historial que tenim acadèmic, no? De la manera que surti, i la veritat és que si tu disfrutes més a l'escenari també la gent disfruta més, no?
Moltes gràcies per compartir això, Bernat. Estic content de tornar a trobar aquí després de tot aquest recorregut que has fet. Jo em quedo amb la paraula interpretació que has fet, però interpretació en un sentit fort, és a dir, una interpretació creativa. Si nosaltres llegim una sonata clàssica sense creativitat, estem perduts com a intèrprets. Aleshores, penso que el que esteu fent aquí és interpretar les peces d'una manera creativa, però també d'una manera respectuosa i amb gust. Què més vols? També em fa pensar, no sé si això et servirà, però penso, clar, aquestes obres del repertori canònic són missatges, són discursos, però també són fetitxos. Tu deies consagrat, no? Són fetitxos, una sonata de Beethoven, un preludi fuga és un fetitx. Llavors, per la persona per a la qual aquell és un fetitx, penso que hauria de saber que històricament no era cap fetitx allò, sinó que, de fet, els preludis i fugues de les sonates tenim versions, com deia el Luca fa un moment, els improvisadors que feien preludis improvisats de les sonates clàssiques i tot, això ha durat fins entre guerres del segle passat, així que històricament no hi ha cap inconvenient, no? I potser sí que realment hi ha hagut una època del segle passat en què hi ha hagut aquesta congelació que deia l'Emili, no? De la barrera de gel, una època de congelar coses, però que ja comença a ser hora que aquest gel es vagi fonent, no? A poc a poc. I vosaltres penso que esteu contribuint.
Molt bé, no sé si... crec que anem amb necessitat d'avançar, em sembla, com el temps, però sense dubte és molt interessant que en un lloc com aquest de les jornades amb sentits, en què d'alguna forma es mostren tantes formes de pensar la música no com a monument, no com a objecte autoreferencial, sinó es busquen significat, es vol d'alguna manera buscar una alternativa a aquesta imatge que analíticament coneixem també de la forma autoreferencial, etc. Però hi ha després la vessant de qui et toca, que finalment també ha arribat exactament la mateixa idea, no? Aquesta idea de l'haver de respondre a aquesta perfecció que hi ha correspondència, partitura, interpretació, però partint de la mateixa idea que és aquesta cosa i que no som nosaltres, sinó nosaltres hem de fer alguna cosa que està allà, no? I clar, aquí realment aquest canvi de percepció és una forma d'entrar, de donar, de fer aquesta dimensió humana a la interpretació que busquem i que té tantes vessants. Té una discursiva, té després una verte vivencial de qui la toca, de qui l'escolta, de qui la comparteix, i per tant hi ha tantes vessants. O sigui, realment crec que ens implica a tothom segons quina vessant, de quina manera estem al món de la música, però finalment és compartida realment. Sí. Gràcies.
Bon dia, gràcies per l'oportunitat en aquestes jornades amb Sentits. Em dic Laia Martín i soc de Puigcerdà, capital de la Cerdanya, als Pirineus. Normalment no ens presentem així a una comunicació o una conferència i la informació que acabo de donar no és rellevant, però en aquest cas la meva procedència ha estat clau per començar aquesta investigació artística que us proposo aquí sobre la suite per a piano Cerdanya de Séverac. La Cerdanya està dividida entre França i Espanya. La Cerdanya francesa forma part del departament dels Pirineus Orientals després de l'annexió a França amb el Tractat dels Pirineus en 1659 i actualment pertany a la regió d'Occitània, també coneguda com a Catalunya Nord. Séverac es va establir a Ceret, teniu aquí encerclat, que és la capital del Vallespir i que també forma part d'aquesta Catalunya Nord, juntament amb els seus amics Manol Huguet i Frank Haviland a finals de 1909. Séverac va viatjar a Catalunya en diverses ocasions, com es pot veure a la seva correspondència, als escrits dels testimonis o a l'obra que aquí m'ocupa, Cerdanya. A la seva estima per la regió catalana també hem d'afegir la seva amistat amb nombrosos artistes catalans amb els que va coincidir durant la seva etapa a París. De totes maneres, la precedent cultura catalana ha estat sempre molt present a la part francesa i per tant Séverac se la va trobar també a Ceret i va ser allà on juntament amb els pintors Pablo Picasso i Georges Braque on van descobrir el seu paisatge sonor i els instruments de la formació de la cobla van passar a formar part de la seva obra. Malgrat les diferències de repertori i d'instrumentació que hi havia entre la cobla rossellonesa, que entretenia la part francesa, i la cobla catalana, que entretenia la part espanyola, ambdues comptaven amb les tibles i les tenores, que són els coneguts instruments catalans, que li donen aquest color característic en aquestes formacions i que va ser el que els hi va cridar l'atenció. Coneixem la impressió que li va fer a Séverac escoltar la cobla catalana a Ceret, amb llàgrimes als ulls i tremolant d'emoció, però afortunadament aquesta impressió, juntament amb diverses motivacions com a regionalista convençut, que el van portar a deixar París i a instal·lar-se a la seva regió del Midi, es va materialitzar a la seva obra. Des d'aquest moment, els sons catalans en van formar part, incorporant aquells instruments a la seva obra, com és el cas d'Elio Gàbale, amb la imitació d'aquells sons amb altres instruments, com a Cerdanya, o amb l'apropiació de les característiques d'aquella música, com a Cerdanya, Minyoneta per a violí i piano o Sous les lauriers roses. Poc més d'un segle després, aquestes obres ens permeten continuar trobant diferents maneres d'interpretar-les i pensar en propostes artístiques com la meva, en la que incorporo l'actual paisatge sonor a la performance. És també una manera de seguir l'exemple d'aquells artistes, de buscar noves maneres d'oferir la seva obra i de proposar perspectives que podrien ser atractives per a altres intèrprets. A Cerdanya trobem el paisatge sonor català explícitament, però aquesta obra, i això és el que vull explorar amb aquesta incipient recerca, és que també ens permet trobar-lo d'una manera més implícita a les característiques de les seves melodies, als ritmes, a les estructures, i no només de la sardana, sinó també d'altres danses populars que tocaven les cobles. El meu objectiu és explorar amb el piano les possibilitats d'un so imaginari de la Cerdanya de la primera dècada del segle XX. D'altra banda, els actuals i familiars sons per l'oient del mateix esdeveniment, celebració o activitat es barregen en forma de gravacions amb aquells que van tenir lloc fa més d'un segle, tal com Séverac els va traslladar a la seva obra i com la meva imaginació d'aquell paisatge sonor em porta a interpretar-la. L'objectiu és provocar una reacció a l'audiència i despertar associacions, oferint una perspectiva contextualitzada de l'obra de Séverac, així com fer reflexionar sobre temes socials com la contaminació o la recuperació i la pèrdua de les tradicions. Durant més de 50 anys el concepte de paisatge sonor ha estat i és objecte de múltiples reflexions i diversos usos. No és aquí el meu propòsit estudiar el concepte per si mateix, sinó utilitzar el paisatge sonor a la interpretació entès com el conjunt de sons que defineixen un específic espai-temps, incloent les dimensions humanes, socials, etc., implícites en ell, com la interacció amb la naturalesa, les creences, les formes de lleure o les formes de subsistència, i que correspon també amb la forma que es defineix a l'Affairs International Standard, dedicat al paisatge sonor i publicat a l'agost de 2014. Bé, la suite per a piano Cerdanya es compon de 5 peces: En Tartan, L'arrivée en Cerdanya, Les Fêtes, Souvenir de Puigcerdà, Ménétrier et Glanès, Souvenir d'un pèlerinage à Font-Romeu, Les Muletiers devant les crises de Llívia, Complenta i Les Retours des Muletiers. He escollit alguns extractes representatius de 4 de les 5 peces per mostrar com s'entremesclen els paisatges actual i passat i com s'impregnen dels trets de la cobla. M'agradaria també destacar la manera en què la religió, les festes populars, la tradició, la natura i la pertinença estan presents a Cerdanya. Bé, començarem amb En Tartan, que és una vocació del que era arribar a la Cerdanya amb el trot de la tartana. I és que encara que la major part de la peça està relacionada amb la imitació d'aquest moviment, els sentiments que es van despertar en Severac a l'arribar a terres catalanes està també present. El tema de l'esperança, que és recurrent en 4 dels 5 números, la nostàlgia pels records amb els seus amics catalans floreix i els records dels sonors de la cobla emergeixen amb les intervencions del Flabiol. A les pistes que he incorporat en aquest número vull traslladar el paisatge sonor actual generat a l'arribada a la Cerdanya amb els sons de trens, cotxes i avionetes que he extret de recursos lliures accessibles a YouTube per ser utilitzats com a efectes sonors. I al mateix temps és una manera de recordar i fer consciència de l'impacte que tenen aquests mitjans de transport. Veiem que la introducció d'en Tartan conté trets de la sonoritat de la introducció interpretada pel Flabiol a la sardana, i perquè fa l'entremescla de paisatges sonors, al tenuto del compàs 1 se sent una pista amb l'arrencada del cotxe i quan el so del motor s'apropa és quan començo el compàs 2 amb el molto allegro. A molts fragments, Severac incorpora també accents als baixos, notes pedal i notes repetides, que també és molt comú a la instrumentació per cobla, com el pedal amb la bemoll que veiem aquí o l'insistent si bemoll. El compàs 33 seria el tutti per a la cobla i hi ha els oberts acords de l'acompanyament de la mà esquerra que força el piano a arpeggiar-los i que és un recurs molt freqüent en Severac. Des del compàs 34, coincidint amb el primer acord d'aquest fragment, activa una pista amb el so d'una avioneta planejant fins que comença el pianissimo. Avui he de dir, s'ha espatllat la caldera de casa, he tingut un accident amb el cotxe i ha sigut molt raro que això funcionés, així que no passa nada. Mentre estigui aquí és bona senyal. Bueno, farem un... no sé, això ho puc portar... On està aquesta noia? És que no tinc manera de fer-ho sense el pedal. Bueno, si no, doncs plan B. Bé, us posaré un petit vídeo d'una de les peces que tinc, la tinc gravada, aquesta la podrem escoltar i seguim. Així guanyarem temps. A l'efet, Severac deixa constància de la impressió de la festa d'estiu, avui anomenada Festa de l'Estany, que va ser iniciada a finals del segle XIX per la burgesia catalana a Puigcerdà, on havien construït les seves cases al voltant de l'estany per fugir de la contaminació i del bullici de la capital. Així, aquesta festa va iniciar-se per donar fi a la seva llarga estada estiuenca i consistia en una desfilada engalanada amb llanternes de colors, amb carrosses de diferents temàtiques, torxes, animades per cor, banda, orquestra, harmònium, que culminava a l'estany amb focs artificials, cançons i danses. Al llarg d'aquesta peça disparo pistes amb sons que formen actualment part d'aquesta festa, enregistrats per mi a l'edició de 2022. Això ens permet escoltar les diferents tradicions que han estat incorporades amb els anys i com ha anat canviant. La festa de l'estany, com he dit, en aquells anys consistia en l'exhibició de llanternes de colors i algunes d'elles, com es llegeix a la premsa, eren d'estètica asiàtica. I per mi el primer tema fa referència a aquesta experiència visual i no a la sardana, com apunta Pierre Guillot al seu llibre Directe de Severac, musicien français. La segona part d'aquest tema serien les tabales, les trompetes i les cornetes, de la que també es fa referència a la premsa. Abans d'aquest exòtic tema, escoltem una pista, música sud-americana, on intervé la flauta de pa, com a símbol de la multiculturalitat que forma part actualment de la festa. Amb la tercera semicorxera del compàs 15, interrompo el discurs per escoltar una gravació amb el ball de bastons. I continuo el treset del mateix compàs, coincidint amb el fade-out de l'àudio, que coincideix també amb un fragment rítmic i percussiu, com el ball de bastons, que podria ser una banda militar de la desfilada, amb els sforzando que veiem, els tresets ràpids i els baixos rítmics, que acaben amb el redoble de tambors. A continuació, escoltem els estrèpits, les bengales i la percussió dels dimonis que s'escolten a la gravació a partir del poderós acord del compàs 31. Ménétrier et Glanès es refereix als protagonistes del peregrinatge a Font-Romeu, a la Cerdanya francesa. És una festa de naturalesa religiosa que celebra a l'aire lliure al voltant de l'Ermitage, que acull la Verge Maria, on roman des del solstici d'estiu fins al primer diumenge, més era diferent, començant per l'altaveu. Severac fa menció específica als músics, al títol, el que vol dir que li aboca i el transporta directament amb una experiència relacionada amb aquests ménétriers, jut glaç, que és tal com es coneix encara avui en dia a la Catalunya Nord. Per mi estan molt presents amb la imitació del vibrato característic dels instruments catalans i l'acompanyament del tamborí en un festiu ambient. Em fa pensar també que la música tenia llavors més pes que avui en dia. I les Glanès, que són les espigoladores que s'encomanen a la Verge resant per una bona collita, s'abocaran a la part central. La meva proposta comença amb el so de la gent parlant en francès i el soroll de fons abans de la processó, en aquest cas abans d'escoltar les dos potents octaves en fortíssimo de Severac, que bé podrien imitar els instruments de vent metall de la copla, i són seguides per dos compassos introductoris en els que s'escolta el vibrato dels instruments catalans que continuarà durant aquesta part de la peça. És obvi també que amb el D'après le thème d'Inès Sardanya, que Séverac escriu pel primer tema, que és una relectura d'un tema català que bé podria haver escoltat en aquest pelegrinatge a Font-Romeu. La melodia del tema de la sardana conté característiques d'aquestes danses. Com nou, la textura és menys densa i els diferents plans sonors són més clars, i al rerefons escoltem de nou la gent parlant, però aquesta vegada s'incorporen les campanes del santuari marià perquè la processó s'està apropant. Al compàs 26 ja escoltem la transició cap a la pregària a Séverac i això es comença a sentir les persones i les campanes replicant, però aquesta vegada amb el mossèn, amb l'altaveu, cridant l'atenció als peregrins pel començament de la processó. Després d'aquesta frase, la pregària comença a la gravació recitada per un nen, ja que Séverac el tema també és molt agut. Continua el piano i a la pausa del compàs 6 introdueixo una rèplica del mossèn resant. Séverac evoca en aquesta peça la meditació en contrast a la celebració i, com bé diu Robert Francis Waters a la seva tesi Regionalism and Catalan Folk Elements in the Compositions of the Date de Séverac, diu: Séverac descriu l'ancestral costum d'unir la dansa a la tradició religiosa catalana. És una molt acurada reflexió, considerant que aquest pelegrinatge consisteix en celebració i pregària encara avui en dia, i bé, hi tenim els antecedents del Llibre Vermell de Montserrat, per exemple. I en aquesta part escoltem els goigs, que és l'himne típic català a la Verge Maria. I bé, és la gravació que tinc d'aquest número, però seguirem i al final escoltem la gravació d'aquest número. Le Retour des Muletiers és el trepidant final número de Cerdanya que emula el pas dels mulaters transportant les mercaderies del Rosselló cap a Espanya a través de la Cerdanya. A més del pas de les mules i dels carros, se sent el cant dels mulaters i una vegada més el tema d'Esperanza. Per aquest tema, que procedeix de l'Efet, que va ser escrita el 1908, Séverac estava segurament pensant en el Béniz, que estava molt malalt, va morir poc després i pel que estava molt preocupat, tal com mostra la seva correspondència amb la seva filla Laura, i que cita expressament tant al Béniz com a la seva filla en aquest número de l'Efet. En un dels passatges de Retour se sent per primera vegada en tota l'obra la dansa de la sardana, explícitament la sardana llarga, amb l'acompanyament de dos corxeres i negre, repetit com a ostinato, i que s'incorpora en aquest tema de l'Esperanza. A més d'aquest ritme, també hi ha una altra melodia amb segones i terceres, amb un altre acompanyament típic de la sardana amb semicorxeres i corxeres a la contralt. Després dels compassos 53 i 61, just abans de començar a tocar la sardana proposada per Séverac al piano, llança una pista en la que s'escolta la introducció de flabiol, que sempre sona abans que la copla comenci la sardana i entre les diferents parts. Abans del fragment de sardana, quan es comença a intuir amb les notes repetides, els tresets i una molt rítmica i ondulada segona veu, la meva interpretació s'interromp per escoltar una gravació que inclou part del discurs que es va fer per donar inici a la ballada de sardanes a la Festa de l'Estany de 2022. La resta de pistes que incloc en aquest número estan relacionades amb la manera de transportar les mercaderies actualment i és per això que s'escolten motors de tractors i camions per donar inici als diferents temes. Al final del fragment de la sardana escoltareu un tractor treballant al camp coincidint amb un repetitiu i percussible sostingut que anuncia un nou tema. Hi ha diferents autors que han abordat la presència d'elements de música catalana a l'obra per a piano de Séverac, però cap ho ha relacionat amb la interpretació o s'ha basat en una anàlisi contextualitzada. En la meva opinió, la textura, l'escriptura i juntament amb l'estructura tenen molta relació amb la copla. Per concloure, m'agradaria assenyalar que les obres tenen segones oportunitats també des del context de l'intèrpret i no només del compositor, i és aquesta convicció la que m'ha portat a dibuixar aquesta línia entre passat i present, donant l'oportunitat a l'oient de moure's de l'aquí a l'abans a través del so, experimentant la mateixa situació però que sonorament és molt diferent. El paisatge sonor és catalitzador d'imitacions, d'evocacions, de records, d'afiliacions, està àmpliament reflectit en l'obra de Séverac, però també amb l'escolta d'aquesta peça avui en dia que ens permet l'oportunitat de generar una nova relació amb aquest paisatge sonor convertit actualment per a nosaltres en un imaginari. Moltes gràcies. Ja, no porque hemos perdido mucho tiempo, pero...
Merci per tot. La veritat, sí, és una mica tard i anem així amb el temps una mica lligat, però per altra banda, sí, exactament. Per altra banda, si tenim curiositat per veure això, a la seva pàgina web hi és tot el material sonor del qual està parlant i, per tant, la possibilitat d'accedir a escoltar, crec que sí, no en directe, però amb Laia, tota la seva iniciativa, no? Bueno, i tenim poc de temps, però si hi ha algun comentari breu seria molt maco poder-lo compartir. Question, issues, commentaries, or no? Visit Cerdanya, a wonderful place. No, it's...
Well, good morning. In the words of the inimitable John Cleese, now for something completely different. The field of modern acoustics encompasses an incredibly wide variety of applications in both the hard sciences and the arts. And considering this vast reach of the discipline, it might come as a surprise to you to learn that the origins of the discipline can be traced back to one original question. Why do we find certain intervals to be more appealing than others? Over the millennia, philosophers, musicians, and scientists have offered dozens of explanations, but there still is no generally accepted definitive theory. And over the decades that I have been pondering this enigma, many times I've had people say to me, consonance is cultural, or consonance depends on context. The clearest and most forceful expression of this opinion I have encountered is that of Ernst Toch. As he put it, it may be concluded beyond any discussion that no sound considered by itself and detached from any context can, under any circumstances, be other than neutral and meaningless. And that's already a pretty strong statement, but he wasn't finished yet. He went on to say, the future will look back at this doctrine of consonances and dissonance with the same pitying smile which we bestow upon the once upon a time belief in witches and evil demons living inside certain individuals. So according to Toch, merely asking the question puts us on the same level as primitive superstitious cretins. Yet the widespread preference for these intervals, or at least some of them, across widely divergent cultures and musical styles seriously undermines Toch's conviction, dare I say hubris, So today I'm going to ask you to think about musical intervals in ways which you probably have never done before, from outside of a modern, weird musical mindset. And to help you get out of that conceptual box, I'd like to begin by talking about something other than music. Please bear with me, I'll get back to the topic soon enough. Since I first saw his monumental film, 2001: A Space Odyssey, I have been a huge fan of Stanley Kubrick's work. In 1968, I was only 14 years old, and I, like so many others, I was utterly dumbstruck by the amazing images he had created. So when his next film appeared, I rushed to see it. There I sat in the dark movie theater, consumed with curiosity as to how the film would begin. What imagery would he give us with this time? In more ways than one, I was not prepared for what I was about to see. And I have to say that here in this environment, the effect is nothing like in reality. Imagine a totally dark theater with a screen as large as this entire wall. It helps maybe if you do this and just concentrate on the screen, but try to focus on the screen and nothing else. This is what happened. First, I thought the projectionist had made some kind of a mistake. Perhaps he left some kind of a test reel on the projector. But when the first minimal credits appeared, I realized this was actually the movie itself. What on earth was Kubrick doing by giving us nothing to look at except a full screen of two primary colors for 3/4 of a minute? Now, if you go to YouTube, there are dozens and dozens of videos describing the use of color in filmmaking. And they all more or less give this same advice.
And to use color in your films is very simple. Just establish the color scheme at the beginning of the film and carry that throughout the entire project. If you choose blue as a bad color, then have your villain wear some sort of blue, or maybe when something bad happens, there's a blue light in the background. Establish the color at the beginning of the film, and then you are able to subconsciously make the audience feel a certain way without saying anything and without the audience even knowing about it.
So did you notice what he said? If you choose blue as a bad color, then you associate it with in the opening scenes with bad things. In other words, context creates the meaning of the color. Color becomes a sort of Wagnerian leitmotif, except with an alternative spelling of light. But in A Clockwork Orange, there is no context yet to define the colors. Kubrick was actually using them for their own innate effects. A number of studies have shown that there are links between emotional connotations and colors which are universal. Associations which cut across a broad swath of cultures and languages. So what are the emotive associations of red and blue? Red is associated with danger, anger, violence, passion, sexuality, and excitement. Blue implies trust, dependability, orderliness, spirituality, and calm. Viewing these colors also produces significant physiological effects. Red increases respiration, heart rate, blood pressure, and appetite, as well as reducing your ability to think clearly and rationally. Viewing blue has exactly the opposite effects, reducing the various body functions and improving your ability to concentrate. So if these effects are not cultural, where do they come from? To understand that, we have to go to the field of evolutionary psychology. Basically, it holds that human psyche has been shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, favoring those behaviors which gave us survival advantages. And even though the original shaping forces have mostly disappeared from our modern environment, this human firmware is still present within us and continues to have profound influences upon our behavior today. So how did our ancestral environments create these color associations? In other words, what were the specific stimuli with the colors red and blue during hundreds and thousands, if not millions of years? Three things red immediately come to mind: blood, fire, and genitalia. Blue depends a bit more on where you are, but there's one thing we all see: the sky. You might also see water and ice. So what Kubrick was doing by forcing us to stare at pure, intense colors for so long was to engage us at a deep, primeval psychological level, tapping into associations buried well below the conscious mind. He is subliminally priming the viewer with the central theme of the film, the opposing forces of bestiality and the sublime. But how is it that other filmmakers can use colors in a completely discretionary way? That's because we've become used to color as a decoration, an ornament. We give things whatever colors we want. A mere walk down a supermarket aisle is a veritable orgy of brilliant colors, all screaming at our eyes. And we've become insensitive to the deeper emotive power of color through overstimulation. Our ancestors, on the other hand, did not color their world. Their world had color. Could there be something similar going on with musical intervals? Now, the most basic form of evolutionary programming is called an adaptive trait, with which the survival advantage of the resultant behavior is immediately obvious. We have a large number of such adaptive traits, and two or more adaptive traits can come together to create a new whole which is greater than the sum of the parts. This is called an emergent trait. Emergent traits also have adaptive advantages, but they may not be immediately obvious. There's a fourth type of behavior which borrows its name from architecture, a spandrel, which is an element of no real structural importance. It just fills in a space between other vital elements. Take a spandrel out of the structure and nothing happens. So what is music? It's obvious that it has no immediate survival advantage. So is it an emergent trait or merely a spandrel? The cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker caused quite a stir several decades back when he declared that music was superfluous in an evolutionary sense. Music could vanish from our species, he said, and the rest of our life would be virtually unchanged. True or not, one thing is certain: music does a very good job at tickling our senses. This book, which just came out this January, provides an excellent overview of the latest research in the neuroscience of music. In the second half, Satori focuses on how listening to music triggers the reward systems deep within our brains. At the heart of this examination is what he calls the chills, those moments when music moves us so much that strong physical sensations wash over our bodies. Satori refers to these strong embodied reactions to magical musical moments as hedonic responses. And I would like to introduce a further concept, which I call intervallic hedonic response. Many years ago, when I first began tuning harpsichords, I noticed that hearing a pure major third gave me a wash of physical pleasure. And later, when I began building musical instruments, I discovered that it was incredibly pleasurable to sing fifths and pure thirds against the loud droning of the machinery in the workshop. Over the years, I've encountered a number of musicians and singers who tell me, often spontaneously, that they too get the chills from singing pure harmonies. Now, lest you think this is just a Western musical phenomenon, I'd like to give you a couple of examples to the contrary.
Anyewa baba, anyewa koko, yeah, 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 hallelujah.
And even more compelling, this snippet from Martin Craddock's wonderful documentary on the tribes of the Congo.
The Baka are one of many indigenous groups living in the tropical rainforests of the Congo Basin. Scattered across the forests from the Atlantic coast of Gabon and Cameroon to the mountains of Uganda and Burundi, they were called pygmies by Victorian explorers due to their small size. Others include their neighbours, the Aka, the Bongo and the Gweli, as well as the Mbuti, Efe and Twa from the eastern Congo Basin. In spite of their wide distribution, they share certain core values: egalitarianism, reliance on the forest for food, medicine, shelter and spiritual well-being, and an extraordinary aptitude for music. The polyphonic singing, such as this 1958 recording by Colin Turnbull of the Ituri forest people singing an elephant hunting song, is heard amongst all the groups across the forest.
So how can we begin to investigate the possibility of the existence of intervallic hedonic response? Modern research on the subject is almost universally flawed by one or more fundamental errors. But by far, the most damning error is that these studies are always passive. They are based on listening to musical examples. And whatever was going on in our ancestral environment, we can be certain of one thing: it wasn't this. Nor was it this. It's self-evident that when humans first began to make music, they did so by opening their mouths and singing. Is there any way that singing a fifth or a third might have triggered our deep internal reward system more than any other random interval? This is a graphic I designed to show the interactions between the harmonic spectra of two tones. On the left, we see the positions of harmonics which are congruent, which I call internal unisons. On the right, we see the interaction between closely spaced non-congruent harmonics, which Helmholtz called roughness. He postulated that the less roughness an interval has, the more consonant it is. The octave is, of course, the most congruent of all possible intervals, with very little roughness. The fifth is less congruent and has a little more roughness. The major third, even more so. This decrease in congruence and increase in roughness continues as we move through the consonances in the traditional ordering. So there's at least correlation between the acoustic reality and Helmholtz's theory. But is that causation? I would like to suggest that there is another way of looking at this balance, not as opposites, but as two different components of perception. In communication theory, for any type of transmission, be it audio or visual, we speak of the ratio between signal and noise. Ideally, we want only signal with no noise at all. But nothing is perfect, and thus there is always some amount of noise. There are many possible combinations: strong signal with medium noise, weak signal with little noise, and the worst possibility, lots of noise and very little signal. But the important thing to realize is that they are not opposites. They are just two different components of the same transmission. I would like to propose that the traditional ordering of consonants can be viewed in the same way. The more internal unisons, the stronger the signal. And the more roughness, the more noise. But why is signal important to us in an evolutionary sense? Evolutionary psychologists generally agree that the most important of our many cognitive capabilities is that which we call shared intentionality, which is the ability and motivation to engage with others in collaborative, cooperative activities with joint goals and intentions. All human cultures engage in some kind of ritual behavior which strengthens this idea of we're all doing the same thing together, usually in the form of dance and music. Every group has their own special dance and song, and if you can do it, and do it well, then you are part of the tribe. And as anyone who has ever taken part in such ceremonies knows, once you really get it, it is tremendously rewarding at a deep, dare I say, hedonic level. Could the consonant intervals be an even deeper and more subtle version of doing the same thing together? In this model, the signal we are listening for is that aspect of the sound which tells us we are doing the same thing together, the internal unisons. It's obvious that this explains why men and women sing in octaves the world over, but it doesn't explain the clear preference for the other two intervals, the fifth and the major third. This may come from the different vocal ranges of men, women, and children, both in speaking and singing. Men have the lowest voices, women are generally an octave higher, and children even higher yet. These differences have to do with the morphology of the vocal cavity and the vocal cord length, and have nothing to do with culture. But regardless of who we are, everyone begins life the same way, as children. We spend the first 10 years of our lives, more or less, with no choice but to sing an octave or more higher than the low voices of men. That is, our formative experience with consonant intervals is most likely not in close spacing. This changes the signal-to-noise ratio drastically and greatly enhances our awareness of doing the same thing together. Take the 5th and the 12th. In terms of internal unisons, there is no difference, but there is a marked reduction in noise. The same thing happens with the major third when opened up to a major 10th. Signal remains constant, but the noise drops dramatically. If we go an octave higher yet again, which is quite within the realm of possibility, the noise has been reduced to almost nothing. This intensification of the ability to perceive sameness does not happen with any of the other traditional consonances. In fact, with the 4th, the minor third, and the 2/6, the opposite happens. They lose signal while retaining noise. So in closing, I would like to offer some general guidelines for possible future studies along these lines. Focus on music making, preferably singing. Use pure intervals only, no equal temperament. Seek subjects who report hedonic responses. Investigate reward system stimulus and pathways triggered by IHR. And investigate intervals in both close and open spacing. And in closing, I want to leave you with one more snippet of the wonderful documentary by Martin Craddock, Over the Music of the Baka.
In a rainforest, survival is dependent on your listening skills. Hearing becomes your primary sense. When walking through the forest, all members of a group will instantly react to sound, freezing mid-step. The Baka see the forest as their loving parent who will look after you and keep you safe. You perceive all sounds as the forest speaking to you, telling you what you need to know. All sounds in the forest are telling you something. The hum of bees leads you to honey. The song of frogs leads you to water. There's no need to filter out irrelevant sounds. There aren't any. In our busy modern lives, we learn to cut out the myriad of useless noises that clutter our life. We actively learn not to listen.
Any questions? I know we're running short on time, but.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, thank you very much. That's a really cool approach to that. I like it. I just wonder, I heard someone say or read somewhere, I'm not sure if it's true, that people are born with what we call absolute hearing, that we hear specific pitches, right? You hear something, you know it's an F sharp, for example, and we lose that ability because we learn that there's such a thing as, so we discover that it's irrelevant and we can drop that ability. I have no idea if it's true, but do you know, and if it is, what relevance does it have to your approach?
Well, I've read a lot of literature primarily about the perception of tone, things like that, and it has touched upon what we call perfect pitch before. And from memory, I would say that it's not a universal, that there's a small percentage, I can't remember exactly what the percentage was, a small percentage of people that are born with it. Yeah, I don't know if it really has any bearing upon that. You're still, basically what we're talking about is, and the whole problem of equal temperament too is a huge thing. I mean, I had to cut about 15 minutes out of my talk just talking about the evils of equal temperament and how it destroys our ability to hear in a more primitive way. So if you're going to talk about perfect pitch, and also another huge section I had to cut out was talking about how most cultures around the world do not use a 12-tone system, a chromatic system. They use a 5 or an 8, or moving into Indian classical music 23, or Arabic music 75 note octave division. So yeah, what would you say about Arab children? Are they born with 75 note perfect pitch? Are Indian children born with 23 note perfect pitch? So it's an interesting comment, but I don't think it has a whole lot of bearing on the basic issue.
Okay, so one, it's not true that people are born with this and they lose it evolutionarily, and B, it's not relevant. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks a lot for this fascinating talk, and for the examples and for the theory. I was just wondering, I'm sure you've thought about this, but please let us know, what would be the consequences of this theory of yours, of this model of yours on cultural listening to music? Because in our case, we don't walk through the rainforest, for better or worse. So I suppose we would better shut out our ears walking down the Meridiana, etc. But we do listen to some very sophisticated things. And I wonder if, I mean, I'm sure you've thought about that, how it applies to art music listening.
Probably doesn't. No, and I'm not so interested in that, I have to say. What intrigues me more is, why do we see this all over the world? And also, my own personal experience, why do I have these feelings? I mean, for me, a pure major third it's like getting into a warm bathtub on a cold winter's day. And I had a lot of other examples which I had to cut out of other styles where people are singing pure tuning, and they're obviously having tremendous fun. And like I say, I've spoken to a lot of people who, the Gundecha brothers, for example, I've spoken to them, and they say the same thing. When they hit a pure third or a pure fifth, it's a physical sensation. It's not just, I know it's right, it's properly tuned. It's a sensation. In Western art music and equal temperament, that is not there. It's just not there. So just like we learn to not hear buses and cars when we're walking down the street here, we learn not to listen that way. We actively learn not to listen that way. You can relearn to listen that way, and my experience in teaching people to tune keyboard instruments over many, many years is that some people hear it already. They come to me and they say, oh yeah, I hear that. Others, you work with them for a while and they go, oh yeah. And others, you can work with them for 6 or 7 months and they never get it. So I suspect it may be, to a certain extent, an innate capability that not everybody has, like perfect pitch. Which doesn't mean that it's not a human universal. Human universal applies in 2 different ways. There's individual universals, like we all have the universal capacity to language, and there are group universals. And in group universals, we don't need everybody in the group to be able to do that. We only need a fairly large number of people in groups everywhere around the planet doing that to call it a group universal. I had one more thought I wanted to say about that. Question is, how many people with any given tribal group does it take to establish a practice? Do we need everybody capable of doing the same thing? Or 10%, 20%? I mean, we think of primitive tribes as being egalitarian, huh? All the men go off hunting and all the women take care of the kids and process the food and maybe gather nuts and things like that. But it doesn't mean that all the men are equally good at hunting. You talk to them and their specialization, you know. Oh, you want to hunt rabbit? Go with him. He's a good rabbit hunter. You want to hunt deer? Oh, they're really good at hunting deer. And I remember one book that I was reading about primitive tribes, and they were talking about the shaman that they had, the magic man, the man who communicated with the spirits. And he was doing some ceremony, and the European guy who had been living with him for quite a while, he said, boy, he's really good, isn't he? And one of the natives says, yeah, we're really lucky to have him. He's fantastic. And the European guy said, wouldn't you like more like him? He said, oh, no, that'd be too much. We'd never get anything done. So, yeah, I don't think it really, maybe you could say it's a good argument against atonal music. Good argument for why 12-tone serialism never really was very popular, except for academically, intellectually. Nobody walks down the street whistling serial melodies. Huh? So.
Highly stimulating conversation, but I am afraid that we are very late. So.
Yes. Okay. Just a quick question. Do you think there's relationship between the interaction of the harmonics and body resonations, like in cavities or something that could give this tactile pleasure or connect with this pleasure that you were talking about, or is there?
It's always a possibility. I mean, this is an area which has not been investigated, primarily because, like I say, modern people have a modern way of thinking about things. They use modern stimulus, equal temperament, which destroys the whole edifice. And well, there's a lot of research about how the reward system is stimulated by musical events, by how music moves and changes and progresses. Nobody has done any research about that same reward system in relationship to just pure sounds. So it's an open field.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you all. So we have a little 15 minutes interval. Well, they will perhaps are already ready for going on, but we had quarter of an hour.
It will take 10 minutes for them to get ready.
Yeah? Okay. So thank you, and see you in 10 minutes.
Álvaro Soto, que són tots tres estudiants del grau aquí. L'Ala el coneixeu, és un dels professors de l'IT de la casa, i el programa d'avui està centrat sobre Benjamin Britten, que és un compositor que segurament no es coneix prou aquí, però que ho mereixeria. Així que moltíssimes gràcies a tots quatre.
Good morning, everybody. This morning I'm going to talk about the vocal music of Benjamin Britten. Britten is a universal figure, probably the most important composer in the British Isles during the 20th century, and particularly a composer of vocal music. He wrote many genres. He wasn't a symphonist. The human voice inspired him. The combination of word and music is at the heart of probably his most important music. So what differentiates Britten from other song composers in the United Kingdom during the 20th century? Well, I would say first of all, because he has a much wider choice of authors, material with which to work. The majority of his colleagues, people like Vaughan Williams, Gerald Finzi, worked exclusively with British poetry. What makes Britten more universal, more exciting, is the fact that he experimented with foreign poetry. So, if we look at some of the song cycles that he wrote, we see in 1939, Les Illuminations is Arthur Rimbaud. Michelangelo, we're going to hear one of the sonnets later on. Obviously there are many English works as well. A translation from the Chinese, which is a cycle with guitar. Hurdeling, forgive me, without a G at the end. This is German. So immediately we see that his choice of poetry is much wider than his other colleagues. And probably the other thing that sets him apart from the other song composers in Britain in the 20th century, or certainly in the first half of the 20th century, is the fact that he is an opera composer. We're going to hear a number from On This Island, which is a setting of words by W.H. Auden. Arantxa will sing this for us later on. And the seascape is an illustration of waves breaking against cliffs, very illustrative, and I can't help thinking that maybe this cycle was premiered in 1939, but this is a composer who has the sea in his head. Only 6 years later, he was going to write Peter Grimes, which is famous for precisely for the 4C interludes. So, his choice of authors, his experience as an opera composer, although that is more obvious with the later cycles, and a desire to write for specific voices. Luis is going to sing a number from the Songs and Proverbs of William Blake. This was written specifically for Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. They didn't have a very easy relationship. I was fortunate enough to have studied with Graham Johnson in London for 3 years, and he explained quite a few things about what went on during the rehearsals. We'll come to that later. But the fact that he wrote for specific voices, Dieskau, obviously Peter Pears, who was his companion, and has a tenor voice which is very particular, very special. I remember the first time I heard this voice, I didn't like it at all, because I was brought up with Italian tenors, yeah, and I thought this sound was very weird. But as the years have gone by, I realised what an expressive instrument it was, and the colours that he produces are always related to the sense of the text. Pears, other singers with whom he worked and wrote for, Galina Vishnevskaya. She is a Russian, and she gave the first performance of The Poet's Echo to poems by Pushkin. These three singers that I mentioned were the original soloists for the first performance of the War Requiem. The War Requiem is one of Britain's most important pieces, and combines the text of the Latin Mass with war poems by Wilfred Owen. So Britain, as a pacifist, is saying quite clearly, look, war is futile, please learn from the errors of the past. Wilfred Owen says, I can only warn as a poet. Unfortunately, we don't seem to take any notice. So, these were the three soloists intended for the first performance of the War Requiem. Unfortunately, the Soviet authorities did not let Vishnevskaya out of the Soviet Union for the premiere, and the Scottish soprano Heather Harper had to learn the part in 48 hours, and did wonderfully. And later recorded it with Richard Hickox many years after Britain's death. Other voices that Britain had clearly in mind, Janet Baker, the great mezzo-soprano, he wrote the cantata Fedra to a translation of the Racine text. So the fact that he writes for very specific voices impacts his music. We can't say that of many composers. What we can say is that the peculiarities of each voice influence the kind of music he writes. Also, the poets influence the kind of music he writes. An example that comes to mind for me is Hugo Wolf, when Wolf sets Mörike, Goethe, Eichendorff, the translations from the Spanish in Spanisches Liederbuch, the translations from Italian in Italienisches Liederbuch. The music is completely different. Colors, images, and in this, Britain is similar in his wide use of poets, going out from the rather provincial British attitude. He was a student at the Royal College of Music from the age of 19 to 22, I believe, and he was awarded a scholarship to go and study abroad. And he said, yes, thank you very much. I would like to go to Vienna and study with Alban Berg. The director of the Royal College of Music, Sir Hugh Allen, didn't think this was a very good idea and persuaded his parents to veto it. Academics. One can't help but wonder what kind of music Britain would have written after a course of study with Alban Berg, or certainly how he would have interpreted many German Lieder if he'd been in Vienna and had heard a singer like Julius Batzak, for instance. Obviously, this is mere speculation because he didn't go, but it shows once more Britain's universality, desire to learn from people that were very interesting and could really bring new things to him. The only other English composer that is interested in European language maybe is Lennox Berkeley, who studied in Paris with Nadia Boulanger, and he was definitely a Francophile. So Berkeley maybe is the only other English composer who has a desire to immerse himself in European culture. Let's go to the beginning of his life. In 1935, Britain was working with the GPO, the General Post Office, and on a project for promotional films. You can't imagine many Spanish composers lining up to do adverts for Correos, but at that time, Britain and Auden worked on projects with silent films. Britain wrote music, Auden wrote commentaries, and so the two titans met. And in fact, Auden is one of the three greatest influences on Britain during his life. The first, we must say, is Frank Bridge, who was his composition teacher and viola teacher when Britain was an adolescent. And Britain honoured his teacher by writing the variations on a theme of Frank Bridge, which was one of his great international successes. The second influence has to be W.H. Auden. Wystan Hugh Auden, 1907 to 1973. An intellectual giant. Britain confessed to being rather overawed and with Auden's brilliance. But really, we can say that it was a meeting of equals, that both were brilliant young men. Auden was 6 years older than Britain, and rather fancied Britain, but Britain didn't pay any attention to this. But they became friends, and the song cycle on this island which was begun in 1937. It was first performed by Sophie Weiss, a Swiss soprano, and the cycle, it contains many brilliant poems with great social criticism. The middle class come in for great criticism because of values, because of an inability to look further than the system in which they're prisoners. The cycle, as I say, was performed by Sophie Weiss and the composer in 1937. So the 1939 we have here is not quite accurate. The 19th of November 1939 was the first performance of this cycle. The book of poetry published by Auden in 1936 was originally called Look Stranger, which are the opening words of the song which Arantxa will sing for us, Seascape. But when after it had been first published, this title was chosen by the publisher, not by the author. Auden asked for it to be retitled On This Island. So it is a kaleidoscopic view of the British Isles, geography and social structure. Seascape, about the beauties of the sea. Looking forward, as I say, to Peter Grimes. The accompaniment has lots of swirling semiquavers, which seems to suggest waves rushing forward. And in the left hand, there is a syncopated, repeated note. It seems to be the opposite, the tide pulling back. So the waves are crashing against the cliff, and then there's an opposite force bringing the tide back. Britain adored Schubert, and I can't help thinking that maybe the second Zuleika song, where there are lots of semiquavers to represent the west wind. I can't help wondering whether in the back of his mind Britain was recalling that, but this is just hearsay. Now, the 7 sonnets of Michelangelo. This is the first work that Britain actually wrote for peers. So this very special tenor voice. Michelangelo Buonarroti, 1475 to 1564. A true Renaissance man, a sculptor, a painter, an architect, a poet. We don't have many polyphacetic figures like that these days. And his sonnets were dedicated, the great painter's love poems to a handsome, much younger man called Tommaso de Cavalieri, 1509 to 87. The performance the first performance was in the Wigmore Hall in September 1942 in a concert which was organised by the publisher Boosey and Hawkes, and also included the first performance of Bartok Contrasts for violin, clarinet and piano, and a new quintet by Arthur Bliss. So the songs were like kind of hidden in the middle of the concert. And I'm sure the very traditional English society didn't realise what was really behind these poems. Ignorance is bliss. Many people that listen to Lieder or listen to songs in a foreign language without worrying to understand what the text is about miss a lot. Maybe for Britain's safety, maybe this was a good idea, because let's forget that homosexuality was a punishable crime in the United Kingdom until 1967. Quite an interesting fact. So the song was conceived while Britton and Piers were in America. They went to New York to be with Auden. They left before the war was declared, and Auden's cycle, his family, his extended family was very welcoming, but Britton and Piers were rather more withdrawn than Auden's extravagance. And so they decided, at great risk, to come back in 1942. And as conscientious objectors, they could very easily have gone to prison, which was the fate of another composer, Michael Tippett. The difference being that Britton and Piers came from good families, and Michael Tippett was from more working class and a confessed communist. So we say the law is the same for everybody, but it certainly wasn't in that case. The British government, rather than sending Piers and Britton to prison, made them do concerts for the war effort, which was maybe a very rare, intelligent thing that governments sometimes, probably by mistake, do. You know? So it was conceived while Britton and Piers were in America, but it was performed in the Wigmore Hall several months after they returned. There's a little code. One of the sonnets says "spirito ben nato," and more than one commentator, including my mentor Graham Johnson, says that it was as if Piers was singing to him Ben Britton. Michael is very, very vigorous, very virile. It was people have said that Britton wanted to show that Piers could sing dramatic repertoire, that he could sing La Bohème, for instance. But in the sonnet number 30, it's a very gentle love song, an oasis of calm. There are 13 and a half bars of G major at the beginning, before the work modulates. Also, you'll hear the Lydian C sharp, the augmented fourth, at the beginning, which gives it a kind of mystic idea, the idea of love being something which we can't understand, but when it happens is beautiful. Britton and Piers love companionship, and also we could say that Piers was a good literary advisor to Britton. That Piers was very well read, and for many of Britton's works, the choice of texts comes directly from Piers. So, this is a great painter's love poem to a handsome and much younger man. Contrast, there is gentle moonlight and hot sunlight. Maybe I should put the poem here. This is the Italian original and a translation into English by Piers. So we have the contrast between gentle moonlight, hot sunlight, and listen when we perform it to the changes in the left-hand harmony, which really mirror the words in the text. And there's one very interesting moment where there is a juxtaposition of harmony in D major and E flat major, and this then calms into a B major. This is a magic moment. So it's almost like a prayer. So this is the sonnet number 30 from Michelangelo. We can go a few years ahead and talk about winter words. The composer who set most, Thomas Hardy, the 19th century poet, 1840 to 1928, a novelist, probably still better known to the general public in the UK as a novelist, the author of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, The Mayor of Casterbridge, for instance. Hardy, the great Hardy composer was Gerald Finzi. There was not a lot of love lost between Finzi and Britten. Their aesthetics were so different. In fact, Britain had difficult relations with many people. William Walton was a great composer who promised he was the enfant terrible of the 1930s, but his star gradually became eclipsed by Britain, and Walton was very bitter about this. He said once that, talking about Britain's exclusive recording contract with the Decca company, that if Benjamin Britten farted, the Decca company would be there to record it. But this is obviously embitterment for the fact that a younger composer has stolen the limelight. Back to Thomas Hardy. As I said, Gerald Finzi was the great composer for Hardy. There is one song. Oh yes, yeah. One song in the cycle that it was set by both Britten and Finzi, and they're very different. But we don't have time to talk about that. Winter Words is like Britten's Winterreise. It begins in D minor, like the first number of Winterreise, and the cycle. The last number, which Alvaro will sing for us, ends in D major. The song cycle is very cinematographic, lots of action, but this song is the only really deep philosophical no action song. So I've chosen this specifically to show a different side. The poet's negation of Christian afterlife, A piano tessitura, you'll hear that the left hand has chords in this register in a closed position, which all the harmony teachers would say, dreadful, can't do that. But Britain did it, and I think you'll find out why. And this last song, obviously, I can't help but think of Schubert's Der Leiermann, the last number of Winterreise, which ends with questions. How long, says Hardy, and wunderliche Alter, soll ich mit dir gehen, willst zu meiner Liedern deine Leier drehen? Strange old man, shall I go with you? Will you grind your hurdy-gurdy to my songs? Britain was a great Schubertian, and was the only one who stood up to the schoolyard bully who was Fischer-Dieskau. They performed Schubert, and Fischer-Dieskau was not used to Britain giving him advice. Fischer-Dieskau was used to telling the pianist which fingers to use. So it was a difficult relationship, but sparks flew. And I think in the songs on Proverbs of William Blake, which is the last cycle I'm going to talk about very briefly, you will see this. Fischer-Dieskau, the world's most famous leader singer at the time, had performed in the War Requiem. The unease between the two performers, I think in the Tiger, you can feel this, the difference, the displacement between the vocal line and the piano. The use of these wonderful Blake poems, Blake 1757 to 1827, again, a poet, a painter, a printmaker, a very well-formed romantic. The structure of the work has proverbs from hell, which are prose poems, and then lyrics from a cycle of the songs of experience. Again, these were chosen by Peter Pears. The dedication is to Dieter, the past and the future, and this is a reference to the very sad fact that Fischer-Dieskau's first wife, Irmgard Poppen, died in 1963 during childbirth. So maybe this was something that brought the two men together, a shared sadness. So you'll hear the stealth of the tiger waiting to pounce, the piano una corda, and then a climax when the tiger uses its deadly terrors, clasping. Then a second half where in the first half the musical has gone up, and then when the poem talks about when the stars threw down their spears, then obviously the music goes down, and there's a lot more pedal, and everything is softer, and the use of rhetorical pauses. I could go on talking for three hours, but Juan says I can't, so I'm going to stop, and I'm going to allow you to listen to the voices of Arantxa Prats, who's going to sing Seascape for us from the cycle On This Island. Then Alvaro will sing the Sonnet 30 from Michelangelo, and then the last number from Winter Words, Before Life and After, and to finish the Proverb 4 and the Tiger with Blake's spelling with a Y, which is very unusual. But think in the morning, act in the noon, eat in the evening, sleep in the night. Good advice, no? Thank you. Seascape, yes? Stop.
Look, stranger, on this island now. The lamp will light for you behind this covers. Stand still here and silent be. That through the channels of the air may wander like a river, the sweet sound of the sea. Hear the small bees in the pond, where the chapel falls to the fold. On its ledges above the black and knock of the tide, the shingles rumbles of the sunken surf, and the gold waters are bobbing on the seaside. Far off lie floating sails the ships, diverge and urge and fall,
mortal hand, or I could frame thy fearful symmetry. In what distant deeps or skies burn the fire of thine eyes? On what wings they aspire? What the hand that sees the fire? And what shoulder and what heart could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what red hand and what red feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy grain? What the anvil, what the cross, there instantly cannot cross. When the stars throw down their spears, and watered heaven with their tears, it is mine his work to see. Who make the Lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye that frame thy fearful symmetry?
Doncs ens veiem a 2:15.